The school bell rang, echoing through the hallways, signaling the release of students from another grueling day. But for Chris, the bell's sound brought no relief. He lingered at his locker, his heart pounding in his chest. Like a drum heralding the approach of an inevitable storm, Chris was not just a student, he was the target. He had always tried to blend into the background, to keep his head down and avoid trouble. But trouble had a way of finding him, manifesting in the towering figure of Jake, the school's notorious bully. Jake had a reputation that loomed over the campus like a dark cloud, his laugh echoing ominously as he hunted for victims. Today, he was on the prowl, and Chris was squarely in his sights. As Chris filled his backpack with books, he glanced down the hallway to where Jake was approaching, flanked by his loyal crew. With each step, Chris could feel the weight of their gazes, each one laden with expectation. They thrived on their laughter like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Just as Chris closed his locker, the group neared, and he could hear Jake's mocking voice. "Wow, look what we have here. If it isn't Chris the Invisible." Jake sneered, now directly in front of him. The laughter from his friends was sharp, a vicious blade cutting deeper into Chris' self-esteem. Panic surged through Chris. He wanted nothing more than to fade into the walls of the school or to disappear entirely. But as Jake loomed closer, a sudden rush of determination ignited in him. He wasn't going to let fear rule his life anymore. This was not the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last, that he faced Jake. "Do you ever get tired of being a pathetic loser?" Jake continued, shoving Chris with a force that sent him stumbling backward. Chris fought back tears, pushing them down. He had rehearsed countless comebacks in his mind, but they always evaporated in the face of Jake's bile. But today, something felt different. He took a step forward, his voice shaking but resolute. "Maybe you should try not being a bully for once, Jake. It might surprise you how good it feels." The words hung in the air, suspended between fear and courage. The laughter abruptly ceased. Even Jake looked taken aback. For a fleeting moment, Chris could see the uncertainty flickering in Jake's eyes. He felt a thrill, a brief sense of triumph. But before it could take root, Jake regained his composure, his face morphing into a scowl. "Oh, look who finally found his voice. Enjoy it while it lasts," Jake spat, raising his fist as the crowd gasped collectively. With adrenaline coursing through him, Chris braced himself, fully expecting the hit. But no punch came. Instead, Jake hesitated. "After school, meet me at the old playground," Jake growled, composing himself in front of his friends. For a moment, it seemed like a threat, but it also felt like a challenge. The crowd of onlookers whispered amongst themselves, excitement rippling through them. Chris stood frozen, his heart racing. An overwhelming cocktail of fear and defiance surged within him. Was he ready to face Jake outside the safety of the school corridors? The playground, once a place of innocent laughter, now loomed as a battleground, the stage of a confrontation that could change everything. Little did Chris know, this was more than just an exchange of harsh words. This was the beginning of a tale that would teach both him and Jake the true meaning of strength and courage. With each heartbeat, Chris could feel the weight of that decision growing heavier, knowing he would have to confront not only Jake, but also the fears that had haunted him for so long. As he left the building, the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and red, a beautiful yet foreboding backdrop for a showdown that would unravel the truth about courage and confront the dark heart of bullying head-on. The old playground loomed in the distance as Chris walked, each step feeling heavier than the last. Memories of laughter and joy echoed in his mind, happier times spent swinging on the swings and sliding down the slide. But today, the playground took on a new identity, a desolate arena where fear and bravery would collide. With each passing minute, dread crept into Chris' heart. He could see the familiar outlines of the swings, rusted and forgotten, and the creaking seesaw that once entertained giggles now stood eerily silent. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that danced on the ground, mirroring the unsettling mix of excitement and anxiety in his chest. As he approached the entrance, he spotted Jake leaning against the jungle gym, arms crossed, laughing with his entourage. The sight twisted something deep within Chris. Was this confidence or foolishness? The stakes had never felt higher. Chris hesitated at the edge of the playground. The voice from earlier whispered in his mind, urging him to turn back. But then he thought of all the times he had been pushed around, all the moments he had stayed silent, each one lighting a fire of resolve. If he walked away now, wouldn't that be relinquishing his power yet again? Hey, look who finally decided to show up. Jake called out, his mocking tone slicing through the air. The atmosphere became electric with the anticipation of conflict. Chris stepped forward, squaring his shoulders, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "Let's get this over with," he said, surprising even himself. There was a tremor in his voice, but there was also a flicker of something else, determination. Jake pushed off the jungle gym, sauntering toward Chris, a smirk plastered on his face. "I was hoping you'd come. I needed a good laugh." He glanced toward his followers, who snickered at the exchange, and Chris felt the weight of their judgment almost suffocating. "Why do you have to be like this, Jake?" Chris asked, surprising both himself and his audience with the sincerity in his voice. "What do you gain from putting others down?" Jake's expression shifted momentarily, a brief flicker of uncertainty passing through his eyes before the mask of bravado returned. "What, you want to be friends? I'm not your therapist, nerd. Just admit it, you're weak, and I love showing that to everyone." The words stung more than any punch ever could, but the hurt turned into fire. Chris took a deep breath. It was time to confront his fears head-on. "You're right about one thing. I'm not like you. But I'm done letting you make me feel less than." The challenge hung in the air between them, thick with tension. Chris realized he was standing at a precipice, not just against Jake, but against every moment where he had been silenced and belittled. This was his chance to reclaim his voice. But how far was he willing to go? Jacob chuckled, a sound devoid of genuine amusement, and looked toward his friends, who were now watching with wide eyes. "Okay, let's see what you've got." Then, without warning, Jake lunged forward. Chris instinctively stepped back, but he held his ground. This was not just a physical confrontation, this was a battle of wills. With a sudden surge of bravery, he raised a hand, not to fight, but to assert himself. "Stop. What do you think this is going to prove?" Chris shouted, his voice rippling with emotion. "You think this makes you strong? It just shows how insecure you are." For a moment, a heavy silence enveloped the playground, the tension palpable. Jake faltered, momentarily caught off guard by Chris' unexpected stance. Could it be that his power, the very thing he thrived on, was crumbling? The audience felt the shift, a quiet anticipation replacing their earlier mockery. Chris pressed on, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions. "I refuse to be a punching bag for your ego. Real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. You have a choice, Jake. We all do." The words settled into the space between them, forcing something in Jake's armor to crack. Chris could see the flicker of uncertainty in the bully's eyes, an echo of introspection that seemed almost foreign to him. But then, just as quickly, Jake's expression transformed back into anger. "You think you can just lecture me and walk away? This isn't over. You're gonna regret standing up to me." With a final shout of defiance, Chris turned and walked away, knowing he had crossed an invisible line. He had stood up not just to Jake, but to all the fears that had kept him silent for so long. Little did he know, however, that Jake's reaction would spark a series of events that would change everything for both of them. As Chris walked away from the confrontation, the weight of the moment began to settle within him. His heart raced, not from fear, but from an electrifying blend of adrenaline and empowerment. He felt lighter somehow, even liberated. It was as if he had shed invisible chains that had weighed him down for far too long. But in the depths of his newfound courage, he realized that confronting a bully was only the beginning of a much larger battle, not just against Jake, but to redefine his own identity. Meanwhile, Jake stood frozen in place, fists clenched and jaw tight, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. His friends had fallen silent, the laughter and jeers extinguished. The sobering chill of Chris's words pierced through his bravado, cascading into thoughts he had buried beneath layers of anger and invincibility. Questions spiraled through his mind. Who was he if no one was afraid of him? What made him feel so powerful anyway? That night, as darkness enveloped the town, Jake lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Chris's defiance replayed in his mind like a broken record. He had been the king of the playground, the instigator of laughter, but now he felt like a jester exposed. It was easier to be bullied than to face his insecurities and loneliness. But what if there was more to this existence than just fear? A flicker of doubt ignited a need for change, though he couldn't admit it yet. Days passed, and the tension within the school grew tighter. Whispers filled the hallways, fueled by the drama of Jake's encounter with Chris. Students exchanged rumors, some siding with Chris and celebrating his newfound courage, while others worried whether Jake would retaliate. Chris, however, remained focused, determined to use the momentum he'd gained to inspire others facing their struggles, just as he had faced his fears. During lunch one day, Chris found himself sitting with a small group of friends he had begun to connect with, people who respected his strength and understood the power of support. They began discussing ways to confront bullying, transforming their pain into purpose. What if we started an anti-bullying club? Chris proposed, his eyes shining with excitement. A safe space for everyone who's been hurt and a platform to promote kindness in our school. His words ignited a spark among them. As plans unfolded, whispers of the anti-bullying club reached Jake. Initially, he scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as just another futile notion. But as he watched Chris's confidence grow, something shifted inside him. The fear that had once fueled his actions began giving way to a yearning for acceptance and belonging that he hadn't truly felt. One particularly sunny afternoon, while Chris's group was planning their first meeting, Jake approached from across the courtyard, much to everyone's shock. His shoulders slumped, and his usual bravado was replaced with something raw and vulnerable. Chris recognized the changing dynamics and met Jake's gaze with steadiness. "What do you want, Jake?" Chris asked, wary but open. The air hung heavy with their mutual history, filled with tension and unresolved conflicts. I came to talk," Jake said, his voice unusually quiet. "I know you think you've won or something, but I want to explain." Chris hesitated, his mind wrestling with decades of hurt and bitterness. "What can you possibly say that will change what you've done?" "I don't know," Jake confessed, fidgeting with his hands. "I've been a jerk, and I don't want to be that guy anymore. I don't want to hide behind being tough. I'm tired of being alone." A silence settled between them, two young men standing on the precipice of change. Chris searched Jake's face for signs of sincerity. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance for both of them to move beyond their pasts and redefine their futures. "Joining my anti-bullying club could be a good start for both of us," Chris finally said, carefully choosing his words. "It's a place to grow, to help others, not hurt them." Jake swallowed hard, the response stuck in his throat. He wanted to rebel, to lash out defiantly like he always had, but Chris had taken a stand, and now he was offering an olive branch. It was more than he had expected. "Okay," Jake muttered, a reluctant admission. "I'll join. I guess it's time I learned how to be better." As the days turned into weeks, an unexpected alliance began to form. Each meeting of the anti-bullying club buzzed with energy as Chris and Jake navigated their dynamic, blending differing perspectives to create a shared movement. They opened up about their struggles, sharing stories of vulnerability, pain, and the desperate need for connections in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. The changeover wasn't instant or easy. They faced pushback from some students who clung to the old narratives of their rivalry. Yet, Chris and Jake stood firm, united in their goal. Slowly, they began to cultivate a culture of compassion and understanding. On the day of their first community event, the school gym was filled with students eager to share tales of resilience and triumph against bullying. Chris stood beside Jake, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over him. They had taken their broken stories and transformed them into something powerful. As the event progressed, an air of hope and healing permeated the room, and Chris realized that the day the bully met his match wasn't merely a story of confrontation. It was a journey toward understanding oneself, accepting imperfections, and choosing to uplift others. The shadows of their pasts began to fade that day, replaced by the warmth of shared experiences and the promise of friendship forged in the fires of adversity. Together, they proved that even the most tumultuous of relationships could become a source of strength, a foundation for hope where once fear and pain reigned. Thus, the legacy of courage continued one story at a time, encouraging a community that no longer tolerated silence but embraced the power of unity. The end.